My name is Jonah Jonathan, and welcome once again to the Jazz Musician's Voice. I'm speaking with a former teacher of mine, John Menegon, jazz bassist, really great player, and his wife, Teri Roiger, vocalist, and they make up a duo, and they perform quite a bit together. John Menegon is a world-renowned bassist, originally from Montreal, and he's got a lot of important things to share, and the two of them have performed all over the world. So thanks for watching this interview. Please hit the like button, share it with your friends, subscribe, and stay tuned because we have a lot more future interviews coming.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, today I'm speaking with two great jazz musicians on the scene who are actually, in fact, a married couple, bassist John Menegon and vocalist Teri Roiger. So I first met John Menegon as a student at Williams College when I was a teen, before I even went to William Patterson. And later I met Teri at many of the gigs that you guys had upstate, upstate New York region. And you guys live together now in New York, but you also perform and have lived in upstate New York as well. So let's start with you, John. You're from Montreal, Canada, Quebec, Canada. How did you first get started in music, and talk about your early background?
Well, first of all, Jonah, thank you very much for asking me to be a part of this. I've kind of kept track of where you have, ventured out into the world since you were first studying with me back in Williams College, and I'm glad to see you're doing well.
Thank you.
And when it comes to my, exposure to the music, it has to start with my family, my father particularly, who was a avid jazz fan and a connoisseur of big band music. He had so many recordings of the classics, anywhere from, going back to Duke Ellington. Just a whole list of great music that I listened to. And that was probably why I really got interested in jazz. Although even prior to my teens, my father brought home a guitar. And he played a couple of chords on it, and I was smitten from that point on. I grabbed the guitar and I started playing the chords, and I realized that making music was something I wanted to do from a very young age. So the experiences of home life and being very supported by my family led me to really continue on pursuing a career in music. And I would say that Montreal was a kind of a great city that enabled me to experience some great musicians growing up. It was always about listening and being able to go out, especially when I reached a certain age. Certainly in my teens, by the time I was 18 years old, certainly in Quebec anyways, you're allowed to go into bars, and the drinking age is much, a desired place to go for even a lot of Americans, because they can't drink here until they're 21. Not that drinking is the main purpose, but you could go out and experience these events. So there were a couple of clubs in Montreal. The Rising Sun was one, which was run by an African man by the name of Doudou Boussel. And In Concert was another great venue. These were the main venues in Montreal that brought international acts to the city.
You know, I've been to Montreal a few times doing the festival and talking with some of the guys there, and Montreal is just quite a fascinating city. I remember speaking with Oliver Jones, who talks about like living a few doors down from Oscar Peterson, and
Right.
like I guess he ran into Art Tatum, as a young kid, and there's just so many. There's a rich history there, and there's the festival, and there's so many clubs. I mean,
Yeah. In fact, Oliver, I got to play with Oliver several times, and it was always an amazing experience. I'll never forget the first time I played with him when they called an up-tempo rhythm changes tune. I had never played anything that fast in my life, but I was more or less holding on for dear life. But at the same time, when you have such amazing musicians as Oliver, they inspire, they bring you to another level. And he was a great influence on so many people. He had left Montreal for many, many years and came back. And once he came back to Montreal, he kind of exploded on the scene, kind of taking the place of Oscar. Of course, Oscar left, so long ago, physically, that is, from the city. But again, there's just so many places in Montreal that hosted live music. And I would say that that was the reason that I got to hear so many great people, including people like Charles Mingus, Bill Evans. When it came to the festival, the early days of the festival, you get to see Miles Davis with his electric band. So, there was just so much opportunity to experience the music firsthand. And to me, that was one of the best schools in terms of learning the music. No, I did go to Concordia University, where I majored in jazz, and I got to meet musicians who were brought up from the States to either teach or to do workshops. I remember meeting Ron Carter there. He came up for a couple of days. We did workshops and played. God, it's just, it's all about opportunity, and what you do with it. So those are some of the things that really shaped my musical kind of path.
And it's quite a multicultural city as well. I mean, speaking two languages, and then there's other languages, and it almost feels like the Europe of North America. So who were some of the guys you were working with before you moved to New York to study at Long Island University?
Well, again, it's a long list. People, some of them you might or might not know. Nelson Simons was a guitar player. He passed away many years ago. He was a big influence. And I was in his quartet. It's just a young bass player coming up. He was much older than I was at the time, and I got to play all the standard, great tunes that are, really make up the bulk of the repertoire of any jazz artist. I would say another person would be Vic Vogel, who was a big band leader. He passed away just last year. He was a trombonist, pianist, arranger. He was kind of someone who represented a great deal of musicians, because a lot of people went through his big band. That gave me opportunity to experience that in a professional way. I was in some of his quintet and sextet bands as well. And apart from many other musicians, there was a man by the name of Len Dobbins, who was a radio announcer and jazz aficionado, who had really exposed me to a lot of music by just listening to his radio shows every Sunday. And he had an incredible record collection. Then he would just pull from it and feature artists every week, and just run the gamut. So people like him really instilled, again, this love of the music and knowledge. In terms of the other musicians, you know, the local scene was very vibrant. There was a lot of younger guys I came up with are still playing to this day. There was a club called the 2080, which was around for many years, and I was in the house band. It was a quartet, sometimes quintet, with Yana Stefan on alto saxophone, Fred Henke on piano, Mike Coetzee on guitar, and that was kind of, that was another great schooling for me, because we played 7 nights a week for 2 years. Sometimes 1 month we would just do the music of Wayne Shorter, because we could do whatever we wanted. We would start playing at 10 o'clock at night, and by 3 or 3:30 we'd be done. And that was a way of life. Certainly for me, eventually, you know, I was determined to come to New York. So, and then that's another story that in itself. But so you can imagine all this opportunity to play. It's very rare these days that people have an opportunity to play that much music for that length of time.
Yeah.
So,
Well, you know, let's bring your wife in now and ask her similar questions about the early years, and we'll get into both your time in New York. You know.
Hello there.
Hi. So, let's talk a little bit about your background and your start in music. You started on piano, from what I can tell, and share the story of how you got interested in jazz and how you became a vocalist.
Sure. I started taking piano lessons when I was 5 years old. I was born and raised in a very small town in the Midwest, in Minnesota. And I just, you know, I studied classical piano, and when I was 13 years old, I was going to a church at the time where the church organist died, and I was the only person in the parish who could play. I was 13. I had to like play pedals and everything, so I could barely reach them, but I did that all through my teen years until I left home for college at age 18. So I was just very involved in music in general. My father played the accordion, and both of my brothers played in rock bands, and my younger brother is a punk rock drummer. My older brother played piano and sang like country rock. So there was always music around. So it wasn't until I was in my early 20s that I really even heard jazz, you know. When I was younger, I heard Ramsey Lewis a little bit, I remember, but when I started really listening to jazz, I just totally fell in love with it, and it really changed my life. But I went on to college and I studied organ for a while, and I decided that really wasn't what I wanted to do. So I started studying psychology, and then eventually when I was introduced to jazz was when I moved to Minneapolis, and I fell in love with Billie Holiday and Thelonious Monk, Charlie Parker, John Coltrane, Sarah Vaughan, Ella. I started hearing all these people for the first time, which really put me on a different path in my life. At that time, I still really wanted to be a jazz piano player more than anything, so I started studying with this stride legend named Butch Thompson. I don't know if anybody ever listened to Garrison Keillor radio show, but he was like the house pianist on the show. And so I studied piano with him for a while. And one day I said, I'd like to sing a song with you. So I remember I sang something like Mean to Me, or something like that. And he was just like really surprised. He said, wow, I didn't know you could sing like that. So we started working together as, you know, I was singing, he was playing piano. He introduced me to this band called the Hall Brothers. They were kind of a famous New Orleans type band in Minneapolis, and they had their own jazz club. And I started doing a few gigs there, and they started giving me all these Billie Holiday records to listen to. And, you know, I just started doing as many gigs as possible. I stopped going to school for a while. And, you know, I eventually just wanted to be as close to the music as possible and moved to New York City. And
yeah, I think I read did I read this story correctly that you were like playing giant steps in like a room and somebody said, you're not supposed to be able to do that, you know?
Yeah, that happened because I was studying piano in Minneapolis. After I studied with Butch, I started studying with this guy named Bobby Peterson, who was from a very musical family, very well known in the Midwest. And one of the tunes he gave me to put voicings to was Giant Steps. So I worked really hard on that, and I did it, and I could play it like pretty fast, you know. And I sat down one day, and one of the jazz musicians heard me, and he was like, man, you're not supposed to be able to do that. And I was, oh yeah, really? Okay. So, you know, it was a very sexist kind of climate. Some of the musicians back there were pretty hard on the vocalists and the women who were wanting to play jazz.
Yeah, we'll have to go into that more, because I talked with, you know, a while back, a few years ago, I talked with Michelle Rosewoman, who's amongst the older generation, one of the female musicians. And then, you know, I've talked with so many through the years dealing with that sexism and dealing with the issue of women in jazz. So we'll definitely have to talk to you about some of that, you know. But let's get to now both of you coming to New York. Let's talk with you, John, and let's talk with you, Terry, and then how'd you guys meet, you know? Because you guys have a long relationship.
Well, after having played for all those years in Montreal, I wanted to, when I had mentioned playing at the 2080, there was opportunities for people to come up from New York. Steve Grossman on tenor saxophone came up. We got to play with him, Pat LaBarbera. And I just asked Pat when we were playing, I said, you know, I'm curious if I should go to New York. You know, I'd like to kind of pursue other, you know, opportunities. And he said, definitely come to New York. So that was, you know, one of the reassuring things that happened. And I was part of the American Federation of Musicians, and you got a newspaper sent in the mail every month. And there was a program called Jazz Plus out of Long Island University in Flatbush and DeKalb in Brooklyn. And it was run by alto player Pete Yellen. So I set up an interview. Actually, I came down and auditioned at the school. That was in the summer of 1986. And I was intrigued to come there, play. I had been in New York maybe only once or twice before visiting. Back in the 70s, you know, I remember seeing the Brecker brothers at the Vanguard. But now here was an opportunity to come and study. And what happened was they gave me a full scholarship, which was not a common thing, especially since I was, you know, a Canadian, a foreign student. But they really needed a bass player for their program, so they offered me this full scholarship, which I did take advantage of, and I moved to New York. And one of the reasons that I was so drawn to it, apart from, you know, just the aspect of New York being kind of the jazz capital of the world, was the opportunity to meet so many musicians from all over the world. And to this day, I still have relationships with people in Europe and Australia, South Africa. I mean, it just really opened all the doors that, you know, kind of, you know, furthered my career even more. And once I established, you know, myself as a bassist, I mean, I started working almost immediately with the help of Pete Yellen, the alto player who was on the scene. And from that point on, you just, you know, it's a great community, as you know. New York is just a wonderful place. So from there, I got to meet many great musicians. Later on, I actually moved upstate for a while, but in the meantime, I was still going into New York, performing, and I met Teri, and she had kind of an association with a lot of musicians as well. And I got a call one day from Dewey Redman, great Texas tenor, and he needed a bass player. And I started playing with him in the mid-90s. And then by the late 90s, I got a call from him to go on tour. And I worked with him for about 7 years nonstop. We toured the world. Then at the same time, I also started working with another great tenor saxophone player from Texas called David Fathead Newman. Of course, they were both living in New York. But David had moved upstate, and I started working with him through my association by living in Woodstock, New York. And, you know, that's a real kind of jumping off point for me, you know, just to be on the world stage with these incredible musicians. And the list from there goes on. I've been working with Joe Lovano, Teri Roiger.
Yeah, you got quite a list. I mean, we're talking, you got hundreds of musicians you worked with. You know, Matt Wilson too, Frank Kimbrough, Pat Metheny, Jimmy Cobb. You know,
yeah, Jimmy was. I'd like to just say a thing. Well, the first time I worked with Jimmy was in Woodstock, because he lived there at the time. Bless his soul, he's left us now. But my first gig with him was with Kenny Barron and Al Foster. And no, sorry, what am I talking about? Al Foster was another time. Al Foster was also living in Woodstock at the time. It was Kenny Barron, myself, and Jimmy Cobb. So there were opportunities being upstate because, you know, being associated with some of these great musicians. Yeah, they're working with Dewey. We played with Pat Metheny at the Montreal Jazz Festival in 2005, I believe, which was a highlight for me. And again, the list is long, and that's the reason I came to New York. I wanted to associate with some of the great masters.
Well, you know, Teri, I mean, you've also performed all over the world, you know, and you've performed the music of many of the great vocalists such as Abbey Lincoln and Billie Holiday. You know, talk about your time in New York and your love for all these great vocalists, you know?
Sure, happy to. So a lot of my friends from the Midwest or from Minneapolis were starting to move to New York, so I kind of followed them. I thought, okay, I have some friends out there. I can do this now. And so when I got to New York, I started checking out people like Jay Clayton, Sheila Jordan, Jean Lee, Abby Lincoln. They were all giving workshops at the time, which I became a part of, and that was an incredible experience. And I just got a day job for a while, and I wasn't working a lot, but I was always going out to clubs, and I was always learning new tunes and that sort of thing. I eventually moved up to Woodstock, and this was before I knew John, and I became really good friends with Jack DeJohnette and his family, his wife and his daughters, and used to hang out with them a lot. And that was really, really special for me because, Jack used to talk about musicians and show videos of all these great musicians. And then eventually John and I met. I was part of this organization called Forward Movement, FM Artist Coalition. And we would put on monthly concerts and all write new material and everything. And John showed up at one of our events, and that's where we met, actually, in Woodstock, the Birdcliff Theater. And then we started hanging out, and we just started practicing bass and voice together. And, I was very inspired by Sheila Jordan doing that format. And so we ended up doing a lot of rehearsing for a while when we were getting to know each other.
It's quite a unique lineup of that, especially for you, John, because you've got to provide the rhythmic and the harmonic background without any other instruments. So you really got to know your stuff.
Yeah. Well, prior to moving to New York, of course, I knew of Sheila Jordan and Harvey Schwartz. And there was another great bassist in Montreal, Michel Donato, who actually played with Oscar and Peterson, played with Bill Evans when they came to town. And he had a duo with a vocalist, a Montreal vocalist called Karen Young. And in fact, I remember when Sheila and Harvey came to Montreal, they shared the stage, like Michelle and Karen, with Sheila and Harvey. And so that whole sense of that duo thing was kind of unique. And Michel was my bass teacher at the time. He's an incredible musician, well-rounded on the piano, as well as the bass, electric and upright. He was highly in demand. He had a great sense of harmony, and he could hear. It's unbelievable his ability to hear inner voicings and be able to play and sing and whistle. He could do all this stuff while he played. He was kind of a phenomenon, but anyways.
So I also, is that where you got your whistling?
Yeah,
wow,
must
okay.
be.
Okay, so I just wanted to continue on with my journey, being in Woodstock, meeting people like Jack DeJohnette and also Kenny Burrell, who also lived in the area at the time. And they just became our really close friends. They used to come out and hear us at our gigs. And eventually, John and I made our first album with Jack and Kenny at a studio up in Woodstock. That's called Mysterioso. And John and I both had this, and have this love for Thelonious Monk. I almost said Melodious Thunk. Thelonious Monk music. Yeah. And we discovered that, John arranged his tune Mysterioso, and I wrote lyrics to it that eventually were approved by the Monk family. And so I got to put out this recording with Jack and Kenny, and that was pretty great thing for us to do, to have the respect of people like Jack and Kenny.
It started off as a duo recording, then we got Jack involved, and then Kenny, and then they're on maybe about 4 or 5 cuts, but there's also duo stuff on there.
Yeah,
Well,
the times where I didn't want to, you know, take advantage of them, and so I would say, Kenny, you don't have to play on this one. And he's like, can I please play on this one? So, yeah.
I mean, it's quite a thing to be admiring of, to have that close relationship, the two of you guys as musicians, and as a couple, you can fully be in the music all the time and really understand aspects in a relationship that people normally would not. You know, you're both musicians and both working together in that way, and I think that's pretty commendable, you know. But when we talk about like Woodstock, I've heard this, you know, this, and I'm finding this living up in Vermont. There are many musicians who end up living in a different place than New York and can still travel to New York, but can spend more time in nature and spend more time in the outdoors. You know, Woodstock isn't that far from SUNY New Paltz, and I know you are an educator there, Terry and John. You've been an educator at Williams College for many years. So talk more about living out there. And I know you guys now have like a recording studio and you record stuff out there. So
yeah, we are both fortunate to be, you know, teaching at the SUNY New Paltz. I just stopped teaching there a couple of years ago. I was there for 20 years. Terry is still there.
Virtually now.
Virtually, she's there. And of course, during that time, I was also teaching at Williams College 1 day a week, sometimes 2. And then Bennington College, I was also teaching privately. So yeah, there were many, many years of just kind of, you know, having a good foundation for us financially, you know, and we could still do our gigs. We could, if we needed to take time off, we could, if we had to travel. And that was kind of an important part of, you know, for many musicians, you know, teaching is a big part of surviving. And of course, like you said, a lot of the musicians, you know, who are also living in upstate are doing similar things. They're teaching, they're recording, they're playing. And my interest in recording in general was something I've always been interested in. So building a recording studio was kind of a dream of mine, and it's there now. We still do recordings. I've done several in the past couple of months, and we've recorded our own albums there.
I also think teaching, you know, we both have been teaching the history of jazz for many years. And
Right.
I mean, at Williams College, we were fortunate to do these winter study things where, like, I would teach the music of Billy Strayhorn, the music of Thelonious Monk. You know, that was just a great opportunity for me to really dive into their music. And teaching the history of jazz over so many years at SUNY New Paltz has really taught me so much more about the music, you know, because I always discover something new. And right now, I'm, of course, teaching online. But yeah, no, it's been I still teach private students and ensembles as well, but I'm doing it online now. But I just feel like I'm just not ready to quite let go of doing that yet, because it's keeping me in touch with, you know, the younger generation who are discovering the music, and I find it kind of thrilling to see them blossom and introduce them to new tunes, and then it keeps me sort of abreast of what's going on in music as well. I keep, you know, involved in a different way, I guess.
Excuse the noise. We've got these F-35s that go over our building from from Burlington. There's like a squadron of like 30 of them.
I don't hear it.
I don't hear it, but I have.
Okay, yeah.
driving back and forth between Montreal and New York, I have seen those jets fly across the skies when you pass Burlington.
They are incredibly loud, and there's like I think there's like now like 20 or 30 of them. They're training to be a military squadron, but
Right.
they go like 1,500 miles an hour, so they go up to Newfoundland and back in like an hour or something. Yeah, but yeah. So let's talk about, both of you are amazing composers in your own right and have put out like a lot of original music. I remember seeing your group, John, when you came out with that CD, Soul Advice. I think this is when I was young. This is like 2005, and I saw your group and you performing that stuff, and you have so many great original compositions, and you as well, Terry, writing stuff. So talk about that process of writing tunes and original stuff.
Yeah, I think composition has always been in my blood, even as a young teenager, even before jazz was really a big part of my life. I was interested in writing songs. I was, coming up in the 60s as a young man, you were exposed to so much great music, Motown. Yeah, there was just so much great stuff coming. Stevie Wonder, and before that, the Beatles, and the list goes on and on. So there was a real sense of wanting to create something original. I have written in song form for many years, and that just, encouraged me even more through my studies to become a composer and try to develop as much knowledge about arranging as possible, and having just an outlet for my creative self. I really needed that to fulfill my my inner desires of just being on this planet, putting out positive music, putting out something that is vital to life, in general.
And you guys, you made the move back to New York City, just a short time ago, a couple years ago, and now you're working quite extensively in New York again. So how has that been for the two of you? It must be great to be back in that.
Well, living in the West Village here, we're a couple minutes walk from Smalls, from the Village Vanguard, Mezzrow, of course, when everything was up and running, the Blue Note, 55 Bar. I mean, these are so close for us. Plus, we have a relationship with a lot of the musicians, the club owners, and we pursued as much as we could possibly pursue and trying to get work here, reconnecting with a lot of musicians and meeting new ones, playing on regular gigs.
We both had weekends at Kitano coming up when this pandemic happened. And that was like my first weekend there. And there's a new club that's reopened called Café Bohemia, just down the street from us here. And we worked there, but of course, none of that's happening now. But I remember the first time we worked at Mezzrow, John actually walked his bass from our apartment to Mezzrow. I don't know if he'll do that again.
With the wheel.
The walking bass.
Plenty of experiences in New York. I had one nightmare experience coming off the subway to play at St. Nick's Pub. I never spoke about this on camera, but I was going up the escalator and there was not enough clearance for my bass. So I just cracked the neck as I was going up. So I get to the gig and I open my case and the bass is apart. But fortunately, I had a homeowner's insurance, and I got David Gase to like put a whole new neck and bridge and everything. But yeah, it can be a challenge getting around with your bass in the city, you know.
Something similar happened on the New Year's Eve when John was playing in Chinatown. And he left his bass there to go grab a bite to eat, and he came back and the neck was off.
Somebody knocked the bass over.
And
Oh man.
he still wanted to get paid for the gig, so he sang all the bass notes.
Yep, I had a microphone, I just played, I sang. Well, that's happened a couple of times in my life, but
You know
what you're doing.
things happen, you know, but you know, we'll get into like more. I mean, you're coping with the COVID times, because I've seen you guys did like a live stream performance at Cafe Lena. Isn't that up in Saratoga Springs? That's pretty cool.
That was great.
You know, it's difficult times, but you know, I'm sure you guys are still going strong with your music, you know.
Definitely. We're working on a tune now that John wrote, Shine a Bright Light, and I'm working on some of the lyrics, and we actually have a recording studio set up right here in our New York apartment as well.
That's awesome.
Next week we'll be upstate, and I'm sure we'll be in the studio a lot. We have a nice grand piano up there.
Yeah.
The other thing we've been involved in is producing concerts. I don't know if you know about Jazz Stock, but we have this organization.
Not that one particular, but I do remember John producing stuff, concerts and stuff that I did go to. So I know that's cool, you know.
In 2011, we came up with this name, Jazz Stock, and we found this venue in Kingston, the Senate Garage, you know, that holds like several hundred people. And we've had Cassandra Wilson there, and Fred Hirsch, Andy Bay, just, you know, Joe Locke, a long list of amazing performers, Janice Siegel. That all came to a halt last March, but we are thinking of doing some live stream concerts from there coming up.
Yeah, that would be nice, you know. And we did say we would talk about this. Let's talk about a little bit about, you know, sexism for women in jazz and the challenges that you've dealt with, Teri, over the years. But I would assume it might be it's helpful for John to be there and be supporting you in those difficult situations sometimes, because unfortunately, you know.
Yeah, I could have him by my side. And also, like, it wasn't until I met him that I really started working a lot out here, you know, on the East Coast. Like we really developed a nurturing relationship, and I started feeling more, you know, free to just come out and do my thing. You know, he's been very supportive. Yeah. And I'm just really like I'm still, you know, working on the piano, and I can accompany myself and play, but I'm always trying to get to a better place. So it's like that discipline of practicing that I'm trying, the discipline I teach, I'm trying to get that myself with my piano. You know?
Yeah. Well, you know, if you feel like it, because I see John's bass there, we've got a few minutes. If you guys wanted to adjust the camera, you guys could perform a tune for us if you want, if you feel like it.
Sounds like Ask Me Now. Thelonious Monk, lyrics by John Hendricks, and James Joyce of Jazz. Once you said you loved me, place no one above me. Great for me to make that vow. What dumb thing did I say? So busy being blasé. How I wish you ask me now. I was vain and blind then, prone to be unkind then. Wish they turned back time somehow. Then I was audacious. I ignored what was precious. How I wish you asked me now. I thought then I'd always be so footloose and fancy free. How could I have been so blind? What I once made light of turned out to be true love. Once my ego ruled me, flattered me and fooled me more times than the law allowed. You asked me, did I care? My attention was elsewhere. How I wish you asked me now.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thelonious Monk.
Yeah, that's great, you know. I guess I can continue and ask you a couple more questions. We'll talk about your instruments respectively for young players. Some advice, John, what's your bass setup? What's your bass, and what's your preference for string height and strings you use? You know,
I have an East German flatback. It's about 120 years old. Strings, I use the Brazzi, and I have experimented with many different strings over the years. I like my action to be, let's just say, higher than lower. I still like to have that physical kind of connection to the bass. If I play somebody else's bass and the strings are too low, it's a physical thing. So I need to have that resistance, work for me, as opposed to, having the strings lower, which is, common for certain musicians. I've had the opportunity where some musicians, their bassists have used my bass, and they would much prefer to have them lower. If they do play, they sometimes blister their fingers because they're a little on the high side. And then there's other cats that like them even higher, So it's just a preference physically, what you retain through the sound. Everything depends on the makeup of the instrument, physicality, how you approach the strings. And the bass itself is, there's kind of the classical technique that is taught in most, beginning stages of the instrument, just in terms of, for instance, the Samandel method, which is probably something I introduced to you. There are rules to be adhered to, and then of course rules are there to be broken. We have so many great musicians, especially bassists, have their own style of playing that is unique to them. And as long as you can get the music out and make it certainly, something that touches your inner soul. You want to try to bring out the music that is already in you. So the bass is, for me, It's about the resonance sound that you get at the instrument, how you deal with it, how you respond to it physically, and also in terms of, you know, working that all into the context of playing within a group, you know. So I always like to stand when I play. I never sit down. I find that sitting down is takes something away from the inner core physically. So you know, I've been playing the bass now for 45 years, and I continue to develop, you know, my relationship with the instrument. You know, having studied with, when I first came to New York, I studied with Reggie Workman, who was, you know, obviously has a great history, and I learned a lot from him. His approach to the instrument, seriousness that is required of any musician to become professional and really, you know, pursue the goals to the highest level. And, you know, the bass is, it humbles you every day. You know, it's like, it's not that, it's, you know, some people say, well, you know, it's easier than this, it's only got 4 strings, but there's a whole thing about any instrument that to some degree is humbling. You know, to be a musician and to really get something out of that instrument is a lifelong work. So
Yeah.
hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, that's great. You know, and for you, Terry, talk a little bit about being a vocalist for young vocalists who want to follow in your footsteps and learn about singing, you know.
Well, I really encourage the young vocalists to really listen to the vocalists who created jazz singing. You know, people, you know, starting with Louis Armstrong, Billie Holiday, Sarah Vaughan, Carmen McRae, Ella Fitzgerald, Dinah Washington, Nancy Wilson, on and on. I think it's really important to get to know those singers, be able to identify them. And, you know, I encourage individualism and everyone coming up kind of with their own sound, but first learning about the tradition. Like I believe strongly in that. And lately there are so many wonderful new vocalists, you know, Cecile McLaurin Savant, Jasmine Horn. It's always fun to play like an early version of a tune and then their version of the tune, to show, like, you know, the different ways that songs can be interpreted. And to me, you know, developing a sound, personal tone is really important. And I'm big on repertoire too. I think learning a lot of the standard tunes, all the different styles, is really, really important. And also composing. You know, I have all my students start out with writing a blues lyric and singing their own blues, and there's a lot to write about these days, so it's not too challenging. Yeah, and just, you know, singing just every opportunity that they have to sing with other musicians, collaborate. Also, I try and create a really nurturing climate among my students, like have them get to know each other and be supportive of each other. Because that wasn't always the case when I was coming up, but I think it's really important now for women vocalists to really, you know, nurture each other.
That's great. You know, yeah, you both give great points on your instruments. You know, for the final question, what are the future projects you guys have on the horizon coming out? Because I know you guys are quite prolific. Two of you are putting out quite a lot of stuff. So what are projects and what can people check out?
Yeah, right before this pandemic hit, we started recording with Pete Levin, pianist. Played with Gil Evans for years, and Nani Assis, who's a wonderful Brazilian percussionist, guitarist, and singer. And we recorded one of John's tunes in our studio, which is called tinyhouserecordingstudio.com, okay? So we recorded one of John's songs called Island of the Sun, which you can actually listen to on YouTube. We made a YouTube video of it. But we didn't get to finish recording with those guys yet, but we will, you know, we'll finish it. And we also are working on a duo recording.
Yeah, one of the things about this pandemic for us, we do have each other to create music, and that might be something that a lot of other people are struggling with, not having the the contact with other musicians as readily as they have in the past. So that's something that we've always kind of continually worked on creating repertoire, new tunes. So we have our duo, which is kind of an ongoing thing that we were planning on putting something out by the end of this year, beginning of next year. And a lot of that is based on some original and mixing it up with some standard tunes that we both love. And for myself, I've been pursuing things also because of the pandemic. There are a couple of musicians I've been working with just recently and are going to pursue a recording project that's with Jay Collins on tenor, saxophone, and flute, and Bob Meyer on drums. We just recently did a session up at the studio and are planning more. I'm also working, I had been working with Joe Lovano periodically up until the pandemic started. We just did a project of his that is based on him creating master workshops. And it was myself, Joe, and Lovano on saxophone, and a drummer by the name of Lamia Strafi from Kosovo, who lives here now. So we just did some trio stuff, all original music of Joe's that will be coming out at some point.
That's great. I know both of them. I did the interview with Joe just recently, and Lammy. I know him from a long time ago. He's a great drummer. Yeah.
Great.
And I'm trying to be on the piano more and more all the time because I have the time now. There's no excuse, right?
Yeah. There's plenty of time to be working on stuff.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for speaking with us, and people can check you out, your websites, right? johnmenegon.com and teriroiger.com, right?
Roiger, yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to pronounce your last name, but I think
A lot of people
tried.
pronounce it Roiger. They just assume it's Roiger, so I'm like, okay, that's if that's easy, that's cool.
Yeah,
I have some friends in me, so it's okay.
Great.